Well, Casey, it's been a rough few weeks for the business empire of Elon Musk.
Oh, no. Is he okay?
I think he's going to be okay. He's still paying the bills, but I think it's fair to say it's been a rocky road.
What's been going on?
So X had outages on Monday. You wouldn't know that because you don't spend a lot of time on that network.
I don't.
But that wasn't the end of his troubles. Another SpaceX rocket blew up last Thursday.
And not in the sense that it got a bunch of retweets?
No. No, it literally blew up, rained debris down on Florida and the Caribbean. And the big news that probably people have heard about is what's been going on with Tesla. Tesla's stock is falling precipitously. It's down nearly 40% for the year. Some of that is fueled by increased competition from Chinese electric vehicle makers and others. But also there have been Tesla protests breaking out around the world. And on the upside, though, President Trump did do some free sponsorship for Tesla on the lawn of the White House the other day.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we've seen a car commercial at the White House. But of course, it became immediately indelible when President Trump got into a new Tesla and said, "Everything's computer."
Yes.
Which is one of the best reviews I've ever heard of a Tesla.
That's true. Also a great tagline for a tech podcast.
Hard fork, everything's computer.
So we could spend today talking about Tesla and the many issues that are going on there, but I think it's better to talk about another part of Elon Musk's empire that doesn't get as much attention as Tesla, but that I think is becoming much more important.
I think it is inarguable that what we're about to talk about is actually much more consequential than what happens to Elon's car company.
Yes. So Starlink is the satellite internet branch of SpaceX, and Starlink has been making a lot of news recently. The Washington Post reported on Starlink's ongoing efforts to insert itself into a $2.4 billion deal that the government signed with Verizon to build a new communication system used by air traffic controllers. My colleague Cecilia Kong at the Times reported that the Trump administration was also rewriting some rules for a federal grant program that could open up some rural broadband funding to Starlink. And Starlink also signed deals this week with India's two largest telecom companies to expand its reach there. It is also, very relevantly to me, a frequent United Airlines flyer, going to be starting to roll out on United Airlines flights as sort of the main in-flight internet option.
Yeah, so, I'm somebody who has read a fair bit about Starlink over the years, but it seems like just within the past few weeks, something has accelerated that is bringing it to a lot more places. And it does seem like that something is that Elon Musk is one of the most powerful people in government right now.
Yeah, and not just in government, but I think in the world. I mean, This is why I think that Starlink may actually wind up being the most important part of the Musk business empire, because it is just so hard to compete with a satellite company, right? If you want to build a competitor...
You don't have to tell me that. I've tried.
Yeah, Newton Link really didn't take off.
It literally did not get off the ground.
Yes, because I think it's a much more physical enterprise. Like if you are making, say, electric cars, you can start doing that without, building your own rockets to get to space, right? There are already Chinese companies making high-quality electric vehicles. Rivian exists in the U.S. The major car makers are all making electric cars that compete with Tesla. Tesla has a lot of competition in a way that Starlink doesn't. And Starlink also gives you the ability to turn on and shut off people's access to the internet around the world with the flick of a switch. And that actually does seem like a very important power in today's day and age.
It really does, particularly when the internet network that it is providing is being used by militaries in active warfare. And so when the person who runs that network says, I might shut it off if you don't do what I want, that becomes enormously consequential.
Totally. So today we want to just do a little bit of a deep dive into Starlink and how it took over in the world of satellite internet and what its ambitions are for the future. And so we are going to bring in my colleague, New York Times tech reporter Adam Satariano, who's been reporting on SpaceX and Starlink for a long time.
We're going to do a Starlink of our own when we link up with Star New York Times reporter Adam Satariano.
I see what you did there. Adam Satariano, welcome to Hard Fork.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're here to talk about Starlink, one of the lesser known, but I would argue more important parts of the Elon Musk business empire. You have been writing a lot about Starlink for the past couple of years. Could you maybe just give us like a brief explanation of how Starlink works for people who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, Starlink is satellite internet. And so imagine this constellation of satellites orbiting the Earth and beaming down internet to anywhere that you are. So this could be in a city, or this could be in the Arctic. This could be on an airplane. It could be on a freighter ship that's getting to places that are really hard to reach otherwise.
And give us like a sense of like what it looks like. Like, am I right that it looks like kind of like a little satellite receiver dish?
Yeah, on the ground, it looks almost like a pizza box, smaller, almost like a laptop. It's this receiver dish, and then within a radius of that, you get a very strong connection. And it's been growing like crazy in recent years. It's now in, I think, last count I saw, over 120 countries, and it seems like they're adding new countries all the time. So its customers are regular people who can pay a subscription to Starlink, but their biggest ones are going to be governments.
What does it cost? Say I'm like I go around in an RV, or I like to camp in remote places and I want a Starlink terminal. What does it cost me to buy one and then like get the service month to month?
So the subscriptions start about $75 a month, but it varies from country to country. That's not a fixed number, but in the UK where I live, for instance, it's about $75.
So pretty competitive with what an American would be used to paying for their monthly broadband service.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for areas in metropolitan areas that have pretty strong typical ISPs, it's like not a huge value add. But if you're in a place where it's more spotty, I think there's a lot to be said for thinking about it, not to sound like a advertisement for them.
No, whenever I visit my pied-à-terre in Antarctica, it comes in very handy.
I wondered why you had an igloo in the backdrop of our latest Zoom call.
Yeah.
So, Adam, you were part of a team that wrote a piece back in the summer of 2023 called Elon Musk's Unmatched Power in the Stars, about Starlink and how it had become the dominant player in satellite internet. Tell us just the capsule version of that history. How did Starlink get started, and how did it grow so quickly?
Yeah, it grew up alongside SpaceX. I mean, once Elon Musk company was able to start sending satellites consistently into space, they started launching inside there these Starlink satellites, which are not like giant hulking things. They're actually fairly small, and
How big? Like bigger than a bread box?
Yeah, bigger than a bread box. Like if the old satellites of yore, which would send down like your satellite TV signal, if those were the size of like a school bus, these are more like a love seat, and so they would send up these constellations of these things, and now there are thousands of them orbiting the Earth, and so the more of them there are up there, the more stable and better the connection.
And how far back in SpaceX history does this idea go? Like, as they develop the capability to build these rockets and get them into space, and this sort of quest to build a reusable rocket, at what point do they think, while we're launching these rockets, we can actually deliver satellites into space, and maybe there's a business there for us?
Yeah, I mean, during the reporting of that story a couple of years ago, I talked to somebody who was talking to Elon Musk about this stuff in 2000, 2001. He was interested in this low orbit satellite technology and how it could be applied to areas like this. Whether or not that was like a fully formed idea of what it could become, I kind of doubt it, but it was definitely something that was on their mind as he thought about space more broadly.
My understanding from reading your coverage of Starlink is that there have been lots of other people trying to do some version of this. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' space company, has a project similar to Starlink. There's been some competition in the UK and France, but that none of these have really taken off. And I'm curious why you think that is. Like, why is it so hard to compete with Starlink?
Yeah, the SpaceX biggest advantage is they're vertically integrated, and so they're building their own satellites, they're sending them up in their own rockets, they got their own software, and so all these things, and that's something that no other company can match. It's what Amazon is trying to do, and maybe they'll be able to get there. There's some optimism in some corners that they will. But these other companies have not been able to do that. I mean, some competitors of Starlink need to use SpaceX rockets to get their stuff into space. It's also incredibly expensive. There's one company that has been in the satellite internet business, but it's been more of the more traditional kind. They're now trying to get in the low Earth orbit. They're going to be spending a few $1 billion just to try and get something off the ground, let alone try and match what Starlink is doing now.
I remember several years back, Mark Zuckerberg wanted to get a satellite up in space, and he didn't have a rocket, so he had to hire Elon Musk's company to put his satellite up into space. And so the rocket took off, and then the satellite exploded, and Mark Zuckerberg didn't get his money back, and he's been mad about it ever since. But that just goes to show you how valuable it is to own a rocket company, which, by the way, I want to talk to you about that later, Kevin.
You have a business idea?
Yeah, I got an idea.
So, Adam, one of the main arguments of your piece back in 2023 was that people were getting worried around the world that Elon Musk was amassing such sort of unilateral power over the availability of satellite internet through Starlink, and that he could, abuse this power, turn off internet at his whim. It would just make him much more powerful, give him this new axis of control. And that was before he became the most powerful non-elected bureaucrat in America. That was before Donald Trump was elected. And I'm curious if you could just catch us up on what is the discussion about Starlink that is happening now when Elon Musk occupies such a position of political influence?
Yeah, the concerns are even more pronounced now, but they ultimately come back to the same idea, which is that so much power and control over this, what has become a really critical resource in infrastructure, is controlled by a very unpredictable and volatile person. And you are seeing that manifest itself in different parts of the world. In just the past few weeks, there are things that have been happening. We can pick a few countries. So let's look at Italy, for instance. Italy has been negotiating a deal worth in the ballpark of 1.5 billion euros to use Starlink for some defense and intelligence capabilities. There was some domestic opposition to it just because about why not use a more local provider of such a thing, but it was moving along. But because of Elon Musk's political positioning and some of the comments that he's made, particularly as it relates to Ukraine, and he started getting involved in Italian politics, he's just being who he is. It really, threw a grenade into that deal. And now it's teetering on not being able to be done because a lot of political and government officials there just don't trust him and don't want to be in business with him. A similar thing happened in Poland, where some of the comments that Elon Musk had made about Ukraine caused the Polish foreign minister to speak out, and it just creates this back and forth.
Yeah, this was a really fascinating exchange, and I think we should actually pause for a minute to just recap in more detail what happened, because I think it really does speak to the concerns that world leaders have right now. So just this past weekend, Elon Musk was talking with Radoslaw Sikorski, who's the Polish foreign minister, and they were doing this, as you might expect, on X. And they had the following exchange. Elon Musk said, quote, "My Starlink system is the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Their entire front line would collapse if I turned it off." And then Sikorski says, "Starlinks for Ukraine are paid for by the Polish Digitization Ministry at the cost of about $50 million per year. The ethics of threatening the victim of aggression apart, if SpaceX proves to be an unreliable provider, we will be forced to look for other suppliers." Basically, a vague threat that if you don't stop threatening us, we're going to go elsewhere. And Elon Musk responds, "Be quiet, small man. You pay a tiny fraction of the cost, and there is no substitute for Starlink." So again, these are pretty high-level kind of diplomatic negotiations that are going on in the form of dunks on X.
Yeah, also just cartoon villain stuff, if you wrote that into a Hollywood movie, the screenwriter would come and say, let's maybe tone that down a little bit.
Yeah, Adam, what did you make of this exchange?
It's like it seems like, where do you even begin with these sorts of things? I will say that the last thing that Elon Musk said is like he wasn't wrong. And that's like the rub, is where he said there's basically saying that good luck finding somebody else. And he's not wrong there right now. And I think that position of power is what gives a lot of government officials a lot of concern. And so I think the Europeans are really frightened, particularly when you combine that with the comments that Trump and Vance and others have made about the fate of Ukraine. And so I think it's really worrisome for them here.
I have to say, it's really remarkable that when you consider how critical this infrastructure is to so many things, right? It's not just the war in Ukraine, right? Like at this point, if you're not connected to the internet, modern life is very difficult. Given that, it is honestly somewhat shocking to me that all of this development has been left to a handful of private corporations, only one of which has really succeeded at scale. And no government has said, you know what, maybe we should start putting some of our satellites up there and build our own dang network.
Right. I mean, compare it with like GPS or something, which was developed in the US, but it's open source and it's sort of open for everyone to use. But some governments are trying. The European Union is throwing several billion euros at trying to develop some new technology, or giving more money to some of these other companies to try and get them to do it. But you're absolutely right. It's to a point now where I wonder, is it too late? I don't know. But it is sort of what SpaceX was able to do was they definitely saw around the corner, and they built this very quickly and in a very compelling way, taking advantage of their whole stack of technology. And nobody else has been able to match it. No company, no other government, and it's really remarkable.
And when you talk to politicians, regulators, military officials, in other parts of the world about Starlink, do they feel trapped? Do they feel like they have no alternative? Or do they feel something else?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the country. I don't think it's like an acute panic for in the moment. A lot of this is the fear of the unpredictability of the future, a sort of hypothetical harm in some respects. You certainly see that in places like Taiwan, where because of Elon Musk's commercial interests in China, they've been very reluctant to partner with Starlink. And that's not based on anything like Starlink has shut off something in response to what China has ordered it to do, but it's more the concern that maybe they would in a moment when we really, really can't have any unpredictability.
It's like particularly thorny for China, right? Because they have the Great Firewall. Chinese citizens in mainland China cannot access, a lot of the websites that we use here in America,
including NewYorkTimes.com/hardfork.
Yeah. So, one thing that I think concerns people in the Chinese government is that this could be a way around the Great Firewall, right? The Chinese citizens using Starlink could effectively see the same internet as everyone else, and that it would sort of lessen the control of the Chinese government over what its citizens see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elon Musk did an interview with the Financial Times several years ago where they talked about just that. And he talked about how the Chinese government had sought assurances from him that he would not turn on Starlink over China for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. And so, I mean, that part of Starlink has always fascinated me, is how it could potentially be something that could help circumvent internet censorship in certain parts of the world. There's been flickers of them doing that, like in Iran, for example, but it's not been something that they've made like a cause that they're doing. They really only operate in the countries where they've been authorized to work in.
So, Adam, what can you tell us about Starlink's ultimate ambitions? Does this company want to be the internet service provider for everyone in the world? Is it more strategic? Where's this thing going?
Right now, I think it's more strategic. I see a lot of their ambition in government. They have a massive project right now at the Pentagon for building out almost a separate system that has more security and protections around it to allow the communications that are taking place there to be harder to penetrate. So I see a lot of focus there. But what I'm watching for is to see how Elon Musk's higher profile and bigger political profile around the world, what that means for their ability to get more government contracts outside of the United States. I mean, right now they're doing just fine, but in places like Europe or elsewhere, it's less so. They just did a deal in India to be able to operate in India, which they've been trying to do for a long, long time. So that was really interesting. So they do continue to grow, and a big part of that is because their service works and these rockets continue to go into space and to deliver more and more satellites, which, makes the service work even better. So they have this kind of flywheel effect right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest failures of the Biden administration is that they did not sort of see this coming and think to themselves, like, we should probably, establish some kind of a national satellite internet effort funded by the taxpayer to give us some hedge against the popularity and the growth of Starlink, given that Elon Musk is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, Adam, whether you see the possibility that Elon Musk's sort of increasing politicalization will sort of polarize Starlink customers. I mean, we're seeing people now protesting outside Tesla dealerships in the Bay Area where we live. People are putting stickers on their Teslas saying, I bought this before he went crazy. Do you think that something similar may happen with Starlink, where people say, because Elon Musk is such a polarizing figure, I don't want a terminal?
Yeah, they'd be lighting their terminals on fire. It's entire. Yes, I mean, I can see that happening. They don't release really robust data about like how many customers, the residential customers and things like that they have, and so it's hard to get a real sense of how big that piece of their business is. But I guess where you're seeing it most, just like, not to repeat myself, but is like with government contracts and things like that, and whether or not they think that the company is a reliable partner, because Elon Musk can sometimes seem unreliable or erratic, or pick your adjective.
I have heard that. Yeah. Well, Adam, thank you so much for beaming in via Starlink or however you're accessing this. We really appreciate it.
Carrier pigeon. Yeah, no, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.